boiler room light was on. That was the first thing I noticed when I pulled into the parking lot that morning. The small rectangular window on the basement level, the one that faces the alley behind our loading dock, it was lit up at 6:47 in the morning, and nobody should have been down there. My bakery doesn't open until 8. My staff doesn't arrive until 7:15. And the boiler room is locked with a separate key that only 3 people have ever held. I sat in my car for a moment and just looked at it. I told myself it was probably nothing. Maybe the light had been left on overnight. Maybe the automatic timer had glitched again. It had done that twice last winter, and I kept meaning to have it looked at. I grabbed my purse, grabbed my coffee, and walked toward the front entrance like any other Thursday morning. That's when Hank stepped out from around the side of the building. Hank has worked as our overnight maintenance man for 11 years. He's 63, quiet, comes in at 10 p.m., leaves at 5 a.m., and in 11 years, I don't think he's ever called in sick once. He's the kind of man you forget is even there until something breaks and he's already fixed it before you noticed. I've always trusted him more than I've trusted most people I've known for decades. He didn't say good morning. He walked straight toward me, glanced over his shoulder once, and then lowered his voice to almost nothing. "Don't use the front door today," he said. "Go around back, through the kitchen entrance, and don't let anyone see you come in." I stared at him. "Hank, please," he said. And the way he said it, not panicked, not dramatic, just that quiet, steady please, made me close my mouth and do exactly what he asked. I went around back. I want to explain something about that building before I go any further. My bakery, Callaway's, has been standing on the corner of 5th and Marin Street for 31 years. I opened it when I was 32 with a second mortgage on my house and a recipe book my grandmother left me and absolutely no idea what I was doing. I built it from nothing. I built it from 4:30 mornings and flour-burned hands and years of being told by every banker in the county that a woman my age with no restaurant experience had no business taking on that kind of debt. I proved every one of them wrong. By the time my daughter was in high school, Callaway's had 16 employees, 3 locations, and a wholesale contract with 4 regional hotel chains. It was everything I had. It still is. I went in through the kitchen entrance like Hank said. I stood in the dark behind the prep station by the walk-in refrigerator and I waited. I didn't know what I was waiting for. I just knew enough to trust the man who had never once given me a reason not to. About 4 minutes later, I heard voices from the front of the building, 2 voices, both men. One I recognized immediately. It was my business manager, a man I'll call my CFO because that's essentially what he had become over the past 6 years. His name is Aldous. He'd come highly recommended from a colleague of mine, had an MBA from a school I'd actually heard of, and had systematically made himself indispensable to the point where I'd handed him financial oversight of all 3 locations, the wholesale accounts, and our expansion planning. I trusted him with numbers I didn't fully understand myself, and I'm not proud of that now. The other voice I didn't recognize. I pressed myself against the wall next to the prep station and listened. What I heard in the next 12 minutes changed everything I thought I knew about my own company. Aldous was talking about the anniversary event. In 3 weeks, Callaway's was turning 31. I had been planning a celebration for months, a community event, a thank you to the neighborhood that had supported us from day one, live music, free pastries, a small ceremony to announce the renovation of our original location and the launch of a 4th storefront. I had poured money into it. I had told the press about it. My daughter had helped me design the invitations. What Aldous was planning was entirely different. He was talking about using the anniversary event as a cover. The catering contracts for the celebration had been routed through a vendor account that didn't actually exist, a shell company that funneled payment back to a personal account he and the man with him had set up 18 months ago. He had been doing it with 3 other vendor accounts as well, small amounts each time, the kind of thing that doesn't trip an audit unless you're looking for it specifically. And nobody had been looking for it, because I had stopped looking for it, because I had stopped looking for it, because I had trusted him. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the property. My original location, the one on 5th and Marin, the one with my grandmother's handwriting still framed on the wall inside the door, Aldous had been in quiet conversations with a commercial developer for 4 months. The plan, as he described it, was to trigger an exit clause in a financing agreement I had signed 2 years ago during a slow quarter, a clause I had been told was standard and which I had signed without reading carefully enough. If the renovation costs exceeded a certain threshold, a threshold he had been quietly inflating through fraudulent contractor invoices, the lender had the right to force a sale evaluation, and Aldous had already identified the buyer. The developer standing in my front room at 6:50 in the morning. I couldn't breathe. I want to be honest about what happened in me in that moment because I think it matters. It wasn't just anger. It wasn't even fear about the money, though that was there too. It was something older and deeper than that. It was the feeling of standing in a room you built with your own hands and realizing someone has been quietly loosening the foundation while you weren't looking. 31 years. My grandmother's recipe book. The first morning I ever turned the sign to open and stood behind the counter alone and shook so hard I could barely pour the first cup of coffee. All of it suddenly felt fragile in a way it never had before, and I don't think I've ever felt smaller in my own building than I did in that moment. I stayed still until I heard them leave. Then I went to the back office and I sat down and I just breathed for a while. Hank came in about 20 minutes later. He sat across from me and he told me what he'd seen. He'd been finishing his shift when he noticed the developer arriving, not for the first time. He'd seen the man before, 2 weeks earlier, walking the front dining area with a measuring tape and a clipboard while he thought no one was watching. Hank hadn't said anything then because he wasn't sure what he was seeing. But when he showed up again at 6:30 in the morning with Aldous, Hank decided he'd rather say something and be wrong than stay quiet and be right. "I didn't know exactly what to tell you," he said. "I just knew something wasn't right." That's the thing about people who've been loyal for a long time. They don't always have the vocabulary for what they know. They just know it. I thanked him. And then I sat alone for another hour trying to figure out what to do. The hardest call I made that day was to my daughter. She's 41 now, lives about 20 minutes from the original location, and has been involved in the business in varying capacities since she was 17. She's been asking for more responsibility for the past 3 years, and I am ashamed to admit that I kept putting her off. Not because she wasn't capable, but because I didn't want to let go of anything. I had built Callaway's from scratch, and somewhere along the way I had started to confuse the business with my identity so completely that I couldn't separate the two. Letting her in more fully felt, irrationally, like losing something. I know how that sounds. I knew how it sounded then, too. She picked up on the second ring. She could tell immediately from my voice that something was wrong. I told her everything. All of it. The voices I'd overheard. Hank's account, the shell vendor accounts, the property clause, the developer, all 18 months of it. I talked for almost 40 minutes and she didn't interrupt me once. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How long have you had access to the full vendor account records?" Not the question I was expecting. "I mean, they're mine," I said. "They're all mine." Aldous manages the day-to-day, but you have login access." "Yes." "Okay," she said. "Don't touch anything yet. Don't say anything to Aldous. Don't change anything. Don't give him any reason to think you know. I'm going to make a call." She had to contact someone she'd met through a professional organization years ago, a forensic accountant who specialized in exactly this kind of financial fraud. She had him on the phone within the hour. By noon, he had reviewed enough of the vendor account structure to confirm what I'd heard. The shell company was real. The inflated invoices were real. The financing clause was real and had been specifically triggered, not accidentally crossed. We had 72 hours before the lender's evaluation window opened. What happened over the next 3 days is something I still think about, not because of the drama of it, though there was plenty, but because of who showed up. My daughter was there for every hour of it. She coordinated with the accountant. She pulled records I didn't even know I had access to. She called our original financing attorney at 7 in the evening on a Wednesday and got him on the phone within 15 minutes. She was calm in a way I wasn't capable of being. precise in a way that would have taken me days to muster, and she never once made me feel foolish for having missed it. I want to say that again, because I need you to understand it. She never once made me feel foolish. I had been keeping her at arm's length from the business she'd grown up watching me build, and she came in anyway, and she fought for it like it was her own. Because in every way that actually matters, it was. By the second day, we had documentation of 11 separate fraudulent transactions, a paper trail linking all this directly to the shell vendor accounts, and a recording, fully legal in our state, of a phone call in which he discussed the developer arrangement in terms that left absolutely no ambiguity about intent. We also found something I hadn't known to look for: one of the hotel wholesale contracts, our largest, the one I had celebrated when we signed it 4 years ago, had been renegotiated without my knowledge 18 months prior. Aldous had forged my signature on an amendment that reduced our margin by 12% and added a clause allowing the hotel chain to terminate without penalty. He had personally received a consulting fee from the hotel chain's procurement division 3 weeks after the amendment was signed. I don't have words for what it feels like to see your own signature on a document you never signed. By the end of day 2, our attorney had contacted the lender directly and presented the evidence of fraud. The evaluation window was suspended pending investigation. By end of day 3, the lender had confirmed that the clause triggering had been engineered through falsified documentation and was therefore invalid. On the morning of the 4th day, Aldous arrived at the main location for what he believed was a routine budget meeting. He found me, my daughter, our attorney, and 2 officers from the County Financial Crimes Unit waiting for him instead. I watched him understand what was happening. I watched it move across his face. And I want to be honest with you, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel the satisfaction I had imagined I might feel in a moment like that. I felt tired. I felt the specific exhaustion of someone who has been carrying something they didn't know they were carrying and who was only now setting it down. He was arrested. He was charged with multiple counts of fraud, forgery, and breach of fiduciary duty. The developer, who had not known the full extent of the fraud, cooperated with investigators in exchange for leniency. Aldous's attorney later confirmed that he had been planning this for nearly 2 years. The shell accounts, the property clause, the wholesale contract amendment, all of it designed to give him and the developer a stake in my building's future that I never would have agreed to. 6 years. I trusted that man for 6 years. The anniversary event happened as planned. We moved it back by 1 week to give us time to breathe, and we changed the ribbon-cutting ceremony slightly. Instead of announcing Aldous as the architect of our expansion plan, which had been the original program, I stood at that microphone with my daughter beside me, and I announced that she would be taking on the role of Chief Operating Officer of Callaway's, effective immediately, with full oversight of all 3 locations and primary authority on the 4th. The room applauded. My daughter cried a little, which she would be embarrassed to hear me say. I cried more, which I am not. The renovations on the original location are underway. The wholesale contract with the hotel chain has been renegotiated, properly this time, with my daughter and our attorney both in the room, and the margin has been corrected. The 4th location opens in the fall, in a neighborhood about 6 miles from the original, in a building that used to be a flower shop and still smells faintly of it on warm days. Hank still works the overnight shift. I gave him a raise he tried to refuse, and a parking space with his name on it that he is not allowed to refuse. What I think about most, looking back, is not the fraud. It's not even the fear I felt crouching behind the prep station in the dark, listening to the sound of someone dismantling something I'd spent 31 years building. What I think about most is the time I lost with my daughter because I held on too tightly to something I told myself was mine alone to protect. The bakery is not mine alone. It never really was. It was always also hers, built into her memories the same way it was built into mine, just from a different angle. I was so afraid of losing control of the thing I built that I didn't notice I was pushing away the person who cared about it almost as much as I did. I keep returning to something she said to me on the 3rd night, around midnight, when we were both bleary and running on coffee and neither of us had said anything for a few minutes. She looked up from the spreadsheet she was reviewing and she said, very quietly, I always knew you'd eventually let me help." I didn't say anything back. I didn't know what to say. But I've thought about it every day since. If you have someone in your life, a daughter, a son, a person who has been quietly waiting for you to trust them, I want you to think about what it costs to make them keep waiting. I thought I was protecting the business. What I was actually doing was protecting my own fear of not being necessary anymore. And it nearly cost me everything. The fraudster is gone. The building is still standing. The original location will have its ribbon cutting in the spring, and my daughter will be the one holding the scissors. Tell me in the comments, if you'd been the one crouching in that kitchen, hearing what I heard, what would you have done? Would you have confronted him that morning, or would you have done what I did and taken the 3 days to build the case? I genuinely want to know, because I still sometimes wonder what would have happened if I hadn't listened to Hank. If I'd just walked in through the front door like any other morning. Some doors, I think, you're better off not walking through until you know what's on the other side. I've spent a lot of time thinking about cause and effect since all of this happened. Not in any cosmic sense. I'm not someone who believes the universe arranges things as a reward or a punishment, but I do believe that what we choose to do, day after day, year after year, accumulates. It becomes something, and eventually what we've built through those choices, good or careless, tends to show itself. Aldous didn't become the man who forged my signature overnight. He became that man slowly, through a series of smaller decisions that each one probably felt justifiable in the moment. I've thought about that too. The first time he skimmed something small, did he tell himself it was temporary? Did he tell himself it deserved it? I don't know. But I know that a person's character doesn't collapse all at once. It erodes. And the erosion I allowed, by handing over oversight without staying curious, by signing documents I didn't read, by confusing trust with abdication, that was my part of the equation. I'm not letting myself off the hook for it. What Hank did that morning was an act of courage that didn't look like courage from the outside. He was a 63-year-old maintenance man who could have easily told himself it wasn't his place. He could have clocked out at 5 and gone home and said nothing, and nobody would have known the difference. But he stayed. He waited for me, and he said something. That kind of quiet moral steadiness. The kind that doesn't ask for recognition and doesn't calculate the personal cost first. That's the kind of character I want to have. I'm not sure I've always had it. I'm trying to have more of it now. My daughter is the part of this story I'm most grateful for and most ashamed about in equal measure. She was ready long before I was willing to admit it. She had the intelligence, the composure, the forensic instincts. She assembled our entire case in 72 hours while I was still sitting with the shock of it. None of that appeared from nowhere. That was years of watching, learning, caring about something deeply, even when the person who built it wasn't quite ready to share it. I made her wait for something that was already, in the most meaningful sense, partly hers. And she showed up anyway, without resentment, without "I told you so." That's not just love, that's character. What I want to say to anyone watching this, and I mean this plainly, without any kind of lecture, is that the people who stay loyal to you across years of being underestimated are rare. When they show up for you in a crisis, as Hank did, as my daughter did, please notice it, not just in the moment of relief, but in what you do afterward. Because actions taken in gratitude reveal just as much about who you are as actions taken under pressure. Callaway's is still standing. The fraudster is gone. The building my grandmother's recipes built is being renovated by the woman I should have trusted sooner. None of that happened by accident. It happened because two people chose independently to act with integrity when it would have been far easier not to. And I'd like to think that the 31 years I spent trying to run an honest business, trying to pay people fairly, trying to keep my word, trying to do the thing right even when the easier version was available, I'd like to think that had something to do with the kind of people who ended up around me when I needed them most. That's the only kind of security I know how to believe in anymore. Not the clause in a financing agreement, not a CFO with an MBA, the people who stay and who act well when it costs them something to do it.